know you will find it peculiar, but the more I promote a secular Quranism, the more it becomes Islam. It doesn't matter whether it does or not ultimately, but what I'm trying to explain is that the more you rely on a system of rules, particularly the one you are promoting, the more invested you become in it. And some people might wonder why I would be more invested in it. Even though there hasn't been a noticeable signs of success, but I am aware of the difficulties, and I think the difficulties are psychological. I have explained what the problem is, what the disease is. I've prescribed the cure, and then I guess people don't want to take it, which is not exactly unheard of. People talk about doctors' orders and how we must follow doctors' orders, and I think there's a lot of medical literature about written by doctors for patients who just won't follow doctors' orders because they think they know better. And then you think, well, why do you go to a doctor if you well, it's very strange, isn't it? There's all kinds of psychological blockages. First, you have the kind of people who don't want to admit they're ill, so they don't go to the doctor or put it off for ages and ages and ages until they're really, really ill, and whatever they had that could have been cured becomes no longer curable. Or well, they can become hypochondriacs and go to the doctor unnecessarily, or they could be ill and go to the doctor who diagnoses the illness and then prescribes a cure, and the cure is not followed. I guess an example of this would be the prescription of antibiotics, where the course isn't completed, and this causes all kinds of problems about antibiotics not being particularly effective. I can't remember the reason now, but if you don't finish the course, you don't get properly cured, and whatever virus it is lingers on. No, not virus. Is it bacteria? Bacteria, because apparently antibiotics don't do anything for viruses, but they are supposed to cure. Okay, anyway, my medical knowledge is a bit vague, but the point is following doctors' orders, following recipes, following the official handbook, following the rules, and we know historically that people just find it hard. Lots of our electronic equipment come with instruction manuals, and people just don't want to read them. They would rather fiddle around with their electronic equipment and not have it working properly than read the manual. Perhaps they find the manual difficult. I guess a lot of psychology is used to make it simpler. Now we have the sort of, the long version and the short version for instruction manuals. And also, I hear assembly instructions. I guess I quite enjoy assembling. Yeah, I do actually enjoy doing it, and so I guess I treat it a bit like Lego, or I never played with Meccano, or whatever it is. So all these construction toys, but it is. I think life is really about the giving and following of instructions. And today, I was actually having a conversation with somebody about um, being a kind of catering manager, or and about telling people what to do, and the conversation went to why cooks are so bad-tempered, and we were talking about Gordon Ramsay and how he got very, very annoyed at people who apparently couldn't follow simple instructions. And this led me to think about battle orders, which I think would be very difficult to follow, because in the fog of war, nobody knows what they're doing, and they're looking here, looking there, and shouting, and there's a lot of noise, and I suppose that is why soldiers have to have their drills, so they can just do everything in their sleep, because they already know the drill. Now, what is this to do with instructions? Well, of course, we don't like being given orders. We don't like having to follow rules. We like doing what we like. And fundamentally, this is the problem. And we might accept authority if it were from somebody that has authority, but from somebody else whom we regard as an equal or a junior or in some way inferior. We're just not going to take kindly to being told by them what to do. So I think that is the problem. We don't know who has the legitimate authority to give instructions, whether we should trust them, and all the rest of it. And because the liberal order promotes egalitarianism, it means that we're all supposed to be on first name terms, even with our bosses. And I think this causes in us great confusion about who to follow, who to trust. And if we don't trust our bankers, our judiciary, our doctors, our lawyers, our ruling classes, then everything becomes very difficult indeed. And that is why patriarchy is so important. But then patriarchy is now being defined as domestic violence. And we are at the stage of lots of people using lots of big sounding important words, but not really knowing what they mean, or meaning different things when different people use the same word. And obviously this has all got to be cleared up. But then our media are not that keen to help us understand the world or the issues that affect us. And I think really only a big solution will actually effect an improvement. So we can tinker around at the edges and think we're sorting some little problem out, but eventually that will just be swallowed up by the monstrous mess of mistakes that will keep repeating themselves if we don't grasp the problem by its horns. So I'm saying it is a problem of religion. The West is a political expression. It's not just, it's not a geographical expression, considering we are talking about, the northern and southern hemispheres, and, one side of the world to the other. So people are confused, and Westerners, sadly, are not the most informed people about their own history. And they don't have a functioning religion, and that is really the root of their problems. And so nobody likes being corrected, nobody likes being told that their religion that they have had for about 1700 years is the wrong one. But then the light at the end of the tunnel is that their religion is supposed to worship the Abrahamic God, which is the same God that the Jews worship, which is also the same God as Christians worship, Muslims worship, and that should be a helpful indicator of where the solution might lie. But it does involve the eating of humble pie, because it's not a good position to be in, to have to acknowledge that the political order that you have enjoyed for generations, that you thought was invincible, impregnable, and forever, is grinding to a halt. But then this is, in a way, a humbling by a hypothetical supreme authority, you could say. So if Christianity is a wrong religion, what about Judaism? Muslims would say, well, God would not burden a soul with more than it can bear, and obviously Jews are finding the burden of Judaism more than they can bear, and that explains why half of them don't want to live as Jews and want to live as liberal Democrats in the West and in Israel. So the dissolution of Islam, becomes really very obvious. But this is hard to take, understandably, by Westerners who thought that their religion is Christianity and has been for about 1700 years, or those who thought that their supreme political system of liberal democracy which is what their political system for about 250 years. So the fact that these moral and political systems have crashed and burnt is I'm going to say is an indicator of the vulnerability of even global empires. Global empires have come and gone. We've had the Spanish one, we've had the British one, and the American one is showing distinct signs of dementia. And because of all the mistakes it has accumulated, cannot remain intact for very long. It has a chance of renewing itself, but only if its ruling classes acknowledge its mistakes. And we don't know if they're capable of doing that because of their neurosis, their dementia, their ignorance and their arrogance. I don't know well, I don't feel certain of my success. All I can feel certain of is that I think I am correct in my diagnosis, but I do not know if what I say will be listened to. But perhaps the suffering has to increase a great deal more before people finally take an interest in what I'm saying. Because what I'm advocating is a changing of the entire belief system of the West. What is the belief system of the West? I mean, the trouble is that there isn't really anything that is official. You can say liberal democracy, but then, some people will say it's only a political system. You can say liberalism, and there will be terrible confusion, especially down under where the Liberal Party is really the Conservative Party. And well, in Britain, the Conservative Party is distinct from the Liberal Democrats. So it is very confusing, and I'm saying this confusion and lack of clear categories is actually a sign of dementia, which I know people will find very hard to acknowledge. But if people can understand that all these little ideas are just cooked up to confuse and divide the many peoples of the global empire, that is the Anglo-Saxon Empire, then it becomes clear what these little groupings are meant to do, which is to divide and rule people and make them vote according to the parties they support in order to never get it together to focus on the real problem, which is the system itself of representative democracy. So the ones of you who know what I propose will know that I'm saying it has to be a diametrically opposed system that will be the cure to liberal democracy. I know some of you will find it difficult to think of liberal democracy as a disease, but I think more and more of you will see the corruption and incompetence of Western governments. Perhaps some of you will want to see what I'm saying, while others instinctively reject what I'm saying because they don't think I have the right to tell anyone what to do. I think I have been explaining myself reasonably clearly about what I think is a problem, which is the belief system, the legal system, and the political system. And the standard by which I judge these things is the Quran, basically, which I have been consistently saying is the best available guide to humanity. And this means that I will be coming up against all those Islamophobes who just can't accept what I'm saying. Summer is the season for revolutions. And we live in dangerous times. Summer is a time for wars too, because the First World War, well, people like to declare war in the summer when they're feeling all optimistic. And we should bear in mind how quickly the weather changes and how quickly our mood changes. And I think it's actually useful to to be humbled in this way, because it does show the um, what's the word I'm looking for? Well, if God exists, then he is supposed to have planned all this or borne all this in mind. So, with regard to Christianity, which I've been saying is idolatry, I guess, you know, 1700 years is nothing to him. 1700 years is nothing to the Abrahamic God who created the universe. And so, while we humans think of it in terms of, well, the numbers of generations going back to the inception of Christianity, it is of course nothing to to God, and well, Jews who've been around for longer will obviously think they know better than Christians, but then before Jews existed, there was the flood. So I don't exactly know how many years that all is, but if you think in terms of the existence of one human lifetime, we can think of this timeline of the beginning of the universe to the end of it, and our minuscule the minuscule length of time that we represent, if we're thinking in terms of timelines, and how much we could know of things from the beginning of, I guess, human existence. But I suppose the later we are born, the more likely we are, in theory, to understand more, because we have this perspective that is helped by all this accumulation of knowledge and technology to allow us easy access to human history. I've just realised I forgot to post my stream, but it doesn't matter. I do have a bit more to say about the subject of religion, and its importance in making us understand who we are and what we ought to do. So you will see in the description two videos that I wish to highlight, because they illustrate the what's the word I want to use? The there is a good word, but the word I'm trying to find is the desolation of Western man, because he no longer has a religion. And so I'm talking about Aarvoll talking to this Hindu guy, and I feel that it is sad because he did feel somebody who comes from a tradition of the Abrahamic religion, asking for advice from a Hindu is, well, just pretty desperate. And I did listen to 1 hour and 46 minutes of it at double speed. And I don't think, well, it was a waste of time. I wouldn't recommend you do it. But so it was basically, a lot of big words talking about Dharma and karma, and without really arriving at any conclusion. And I know Aarvoll wants to blend his Christianity with Hinduism, and he even expressed surprise that he's been receiving some death threats from Christians because of his attempt to create his particular blend of Hindu Christianity. If he lived in an earlier age, perhaps in Christendom, when it was taking its religion seriously, he would have been burnt at the stake for his heresy. But I don't think he knows. I don't think he knows the burnt and bloody history of Christianity. So I think that's all I really wanted to say about Aarvoll. I mean, I know he's still trying, and he's been warned. I said, look, you're just setting yourself up to be accused of being a cult leader in your community that you're going to retire to, and if it's unsuccessful, you'll probably be left alone to rot, I suppose. But if it becomes successful, then you'll come to the notice of the authorities who will deal with you. And it wasn't exactly easy for the Mormons either, when America was actually empty, when the Mormons were persecuted from the eastern seaboard to the western seaboard until they finally arrived in Utah. And even then, they had to leave out their key religious principle, which is polygamy. Because if you're going to say anything special about the Mormons, about what they do rather than what they believe, then it was polygamy, and they were made to give it up. So I don't think there is room for anyone really to create a viable religion now in America, or indeed anywhere else, because I think that there is, a move being made to what's the word? To categorize different political and religious ideologies, and I think that there will be governments will be stricter about what kind of beliefs and practices they allow. It won't be quite so free and easy anymore in the West, and perhaps it shouldn't be. So the second video I wanted to talk about was the conversation between Blair Cotterill and Joel Davis, I mean. They're always quite interesting because they're obviously thinking aloud about what to do. um, they're both Australians, and it seems that in Australia, more is going on in the way of um, nationalist activism than anywhere else. I rather suspect that they're being allowed to operate freely in order to see who's going to be interested before they all get rounded up. So I know that Joel Davis is particularly concerned about white genocide, and he has also recently said he tried very hard to be Catholic, and it was doing his head in, and he could no longer bring himself to believe in all that nonsense, and he wasn't going to do it anymore, which I thought was a good thing. But he hasn't got the next. He hasn't got to the next step, and he seems to be thinking that telling everybody to be racist and Nazi is a way forward. I think it'll be just a matter of time before the authorities catch up with him. But for the meantime, he is having quite interesting conversations with Blair Cotterill, who is a very very nice young man. I would hate him to get into trouble, and I know Joel Davis has taken an interest in geopolitics, and his previous position was to remain part of the American empire, which is to support neoconservatism. But he doesn't seem to realize that the effect of neoliberalism and neoconservatism, which is being operated by the Anglo-Saxon Empire, is the cause of uncontrolled mass immigration. So isn't it a sign of Stockholm syndrome to actually want more of it? So in his latest video with somebody called, what is it, Elijah Schaffer, he was having all these fantasies of nuking China and imposing a blockade in the South China Sea and the Straits of Malacca and all that, and then nuking China. I think that is probably not the way forward for an Australian nationalist, because basically Australia has its own geopolitical interests in that it is situated in a particular part of the world that no other country in the world is situated in. And the peculiarity of its government is that it is an economic zone of America. America that isn't quite so rude to its vassal states as to call each of them an economic zone. But if you think of what it has been doing, NAFTA, the EU, and NATO, you will see what it's been doing all along, which is using different international organizations to control its empire. So, with regard to Australians, I don't think Australians even understand that they are not an independent country. Does Joel Chambers understand that Australia is a vassal state of a vassal state? Because Britain is a vassal state. Well, you could say that the whole of Europe is an American vassal state, dealt with as a grouping called the EU or NATO. And Australia has been used by the motherland as a resource of, cannon fodder and other things. And it has basically made Australia at the disposal of the Americans. There are all these, US naval bases and US military bases in Australia, and this is basically the reality of being part of the Anglo-Saxon Empire, or Atlanticism, as some might euphemistically call it. So for Australians, the issue of white identity would be whether Australia wants to be part of Britain, because Australia is British territory and its Prime Minister can be dismissed by the Governor General, answerable to the British Crown. So this is a reality. I'm not saying any, it is not a conspiracy theory, because it's all out in the open. There is somebody called the Governor General, and the position of the Governor General is colonial. So they didn't really get round to changing the name of Governor General, even though after World War II, they decided not to call Australia a British Dominion, and decided to call it part of the British Commonwealth. But the reality is still the same, which is that any Prime Minister, any lawfully elected Australian Prime Minister, can be dismissed by the Governor General, answerable to the British Crown. And this is what happened in 1975 under Gough Whitlam. And therefore, white identity must be about whether to be an independent republic or to remain under the British Crown for Australians. And the next crucial issue about white identity is what political, moral and religious system they want to come under. So for the British, it would be, would they finally like a constitution? Do they acknowledge at last that this magic, invisible, unwritten constitution that they call the British, the unwritten constitution of the British, is it actually just means that the British don't have a constitution? And would they like one? Would they like one that they can easily find? Even lawyers can't find the British Constitution because it's not written. Law students are told you can find a bit of the British Constitution in the royal prerogative and in statute law and case law and all kinds of things. It's not all in one place, and by the time you get them all together, the law will have moved on. The Americans also have this thing called a prerogative. the administrative state by Dwight Waldo says that there is a similar problem in America, even though it's a republic and not a monarchy. There is this thing called a prerogative. I suppose you could call it a presidential prerogative or a deep state prerogative. It basically means that there will be things that the government does that is obviously against the Constitution, but nobody can do anything about it. And now we come to America. There is a problem with America because it doesn't have an official moral system, as I keep saying. And this is a problem that Washington warned against in his farewell speech, when he said, we must, with caution, indulge the supposition that morality can be maintained without religion. So what is a religion of America? Nobody knows. There isn't one. Or they think they're Christian, but then nobody can say what Christian principles are. Jews can talk about their 13 principles of Judaism, so at least they know what they're supposed to believe in and what they're supposed to do. And Muslims, with their 5 pillars of Islam, they also know what in theory they're supposed to believe in and what they're supposed to do. But Christians, do they even exist? And if they do, what do they really believe? And what are Christian principles? We don't know. And I'm saying that is a problem. A cause for optimism is how much religion is now being discussed, which indicates that people seem to be blindly moving in the right direction, which is good news, I guess. So in their pain, in their confusion, in their fear, people, even atheists, are calling out to God. And there is this belief in Judaism that before the disease, the cure exists, because God is merciful and has thoughtfully provided a cure for sufferers to find when they eventually suffer their disease. And I being an optimist, incline to this view. And so I'll conclude by talking about the opportunity cost of rejecting Islam. So what is opportunity cost? It just means that when you only have one of something and you use it up in the wrong way, you won't have it anymore to use it in the right way. So, it's like you have a certain amount of money and you gamble it away when you could be buying your groceries or paying your rent or whatever. You have paid the opportunity cost of not getting into debt or or whatever it is that you should have done but you didn't do because you made a silly purchase or gambled it away. So we only have a finite amount of time. There are only 24 hours in a day. Our lives are finite. There are only 24 hours in a day. So correction is often perceived as unwelcome, painful, and to be avoided. But the only way to avoid correction is to not make mistakes. And if you already have made a mistake, then you owe it to yourself to correct it as soon as possible. And if you're not correcting yourself because of your deadly sin of pride, then it's not a good reason to remain in denial about your error, because every day it remains uncorrected. More mistakes are being made as a result of that uncorrected mistake. And also, if God exists, the punishments will accumulate as your sins accumulate. So I hope I've made myself reasonably clear. The solution is to acknowledge the failure of Christo-liberalism, contemplate its replacement, implement its replacement in a timely and correct way, with no more foot dragging and denial. I know there are 5 stages of grief, and they are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and finally acceptance. So I hope that all these 5 stages of grief will be quickly gone through to arrive at a place of correction and improvement. So thank you all for listening. I hope I've explained myself clearly enough.